first of all, I'm so excited to be in
Hmm.
conversation with you. I saw your film, such a beautiful film, and I love that we're going to be in conversation about both of our projects. Yeah, I mean, my film basically follows three Filipino American women in Texas during the time of COVID. And really, I've been kind of describing it as a coming of age documentary because I think in the process of watching the film, audiences see these three women kind
Hmm.
of, uh, come into their political consciousness. And
Hmm.
um, yeah, during the time of COVID, when everything was, locked down and so much was kind of going on in the world, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, how about your film?
Yeah, spy film for our children. It follows the journey of two mothers, Reverend Wanda Johnson and Angela Williams. They are mothers of children who were impacted by police violence. And so the film follows their journey for justice, but as they come together with mothers across the country to form this movement and help one another and create strategies to fight police violence and and work together to fight this problem that is a very serious problem that our country faces. I like to describe this film more as a portrait of Black mothers' resourcefulness, their resilience, and their ability to fight police violence.
Yeah, one of the things that I
Mm-hmm.
really love about thinking about our two films together is it
Mm-hmm.
centers the stories of women.
Mm-hmm.
It really looks at the importance of family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just the incredible resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
That these women have. And one of the questions I had for you was, I feel like your film, for me, it captured such vulnerable moments, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think for viewers, you know, there's headlines, there's news headlines, people see the news, but then to actually be behind closed doors
Mm-hmm.
and see how um, impacted, right, these
Mm-hmm.
family members are, especially these mothers, and the work
Mm-hmm.
that they're doing, and just the incredible emotional weight and toll it
Mm-hmm.
takes upon them. I was wondering, I just am curious because and I think probably you're the same way, right? As a filmmaker, I just can't imagine being on the other side of the
Mm-hmm.
camera, right? While
Yes.
while you're experiencing these very
Mm-hmm.
heavy emotional things. So I don't know. I'm just kind of curious how you negotiate that kind of space, right?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the question. I think it has to do, it goes back to my intention of telling this story. Um, I'm a journalist, this is my background, and I know firsthand that the topic of police violence ebbs and flows in the media. Sometimes we see that those stories as big news headlines, and then we go on our lives and we forget about it. We forget of, like, we don't know what are the daily challenges that those families face as they seek justice for their children, right? It's so, as you see in the film, it's so hard to indict an officer. It's so hard to change a piece of legislation that will protect people, make people protected against police violence. And in the case of my protagonist, Angela Williams, the mother in Alabama, it was so hard for her. And to this day, she has not uncovered police body camera footage of the incident of her son. So my intention coming to this as a filmmaker was to fill this gap that we don't see in the media, like what happens in the aftermath after the camera crews go away and
Mm.
those families are left to face this pain alone, and we don't know much about that pain. So I really wanted to make a film that I would immerse myself in this women's house, and I would spend time with them, and that intimacy, as you know, because I know your story also, and I have a question about this. uh, you can only get that with like building that relationship, building a relationship with your protagonists, and it takes time. This is patient storytelling, right? It takes time, and sometimes it takes you to show up without your camera, and that's what I did in the first time when I met Angela Williams in Alabama. I really wanted to I wanted to explain to her, I'm here to tell the aftermath, and I will probably be documenting your story for years. I didn't know it would take 7 years, but I knew I knew it would take time, right? And she didn't know either. But and I think this only takes it takes patience, and that's the story that I wanted to tell from the get-go. And I think that's how the intimacy comes through, and we see that in your story too. And I just loved your approach of using those self-recorded videos. And I actually have a question about like how your process, were you receiving that footage as they were shooting, and how was that, like were you reviewing dailies, or you just accumulated footage and then worked with your editor later on? I have so many questions about your approach. Why don't you first tell me, like, how was your process of like receiving the footage from them and
Sure,
reviewing?
yes. For me, so much of the film is also capturing the perspective of, I've been saying this younger than me
Mhm.
generation. And I think so much of that is just, honing in and capturing this idea of like everyday tools of storytelling. And
Mhm.
a lot of that is on social media. A lot of that is this younger generation using their cell phones, posting videos, things like that. So
Mhm.
for me, when I was approaching this film, I thought this would be a great opportunity to also have the form of the film kind of match the
Mhm.
culture
Mhm.
and experience of this younger generation, of how they're also receiving information, how they're communicating to the world, um, and how just kind of their everyday experience is a story in itself, right?
Mhm.
So when I approached all of the protagonists, I asked them about doing a lot of self documentation and self recording. And I treated it a little bit almost like a class assignment.
Yeah.
So I would create sometimes almost like an assignment sheet saying, these
Mhm.
are some things I would like for you to think about. These are some questions I have for you. Um, these are some things I would love for you to film, and things to think about. If you would to film this, would you film it this way? Um, and so as things were going along, and what's interesting is what we just talked about.
Mhm.
You mentioned this idea of relationship building,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's what so much of documentary filmmaking is
Mhm.
really about. At the end of the day, it's about the importance of relationships, right?
Mhm.
So for me, it was strengthening these relationships and having these ongoing conversations as the process was happening, and asking them too, like, okay, what did you film today? What did you think about this?
Mhm.
I would review, I would watch some of the footage and then we would talk about it. How did you feel about this?
Mhm.
And I would even tell them like, oh, I thought this was amazing when you asked your mom this question.
Mhm.
What does that make you think about? And
Mhm.
and for me, it was a real opportunity to try a more collaborative style of filmmaking.
Mhm.
I have made films before where it's definitely more, on the other side of things, where you're kind of, trying to be as observational as much as possible and just kind of letting things unfold. And this, again, trying to, try a different approach to filmmaking, I decided, I'll really embrace this more collaborative style and really treat these protagonists, with a lot of power in telling their
Mhm.
own stories. Um, and I just thought, that's also was kind of what was needed at that time.
Yeah, and the other thing that I noticed, and you bring those three stories together in such a organic way, right? Uh, Monica, Lauren,
Hmm.
and
Jenna.
Jenna's.
Hmm.
stories, they have so many similarities, but also they complement one another. So I was wondering, like, in the process of selecting them to tell their stories in this documentary, like, were you looking for a specific thing in like, because I can tell you a little bit more about like how I also approached two stories of two mothers,
Sure.
and you know how their stories differ and how their stories are similar as well, but how they complement one another in this in the film. So I was wondering for you, because they come so organically, you know, together, they don't feel like repetitive. It's like you are in this journey with these three protagonists and three families. And so how was your approach in selecting them? If
Yeah.
selecting is not a good word maybe, but
No, sure,
yeah, but
yes, but choosing which stories
choosing.
and yeah, and who are the
Exactly.
protagonists to to follow. Yeah, for me, so much of this film rests upon this concept of kapwa, right? And
Mm-hmm.
kapwa is a Tagalog term, which is one of the languages of the Philippines, and it really, doesn't quite fully translate into English, but
Mm-hmm.
it loosely can be described as like togetherness or this idea of a shared identity. Some of the ways that I tend to think about it is here in the United States, I feel like the culture of the United States is very much about
Mm-hmm.
individualism
Mm-hmm.
and independence. But in the Philippines, I tend to think the culture there is about this idea of community, shared, just kind of sharing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just even as an example, it's very common, as it is in other cultures, to have like multi-generational households. Like the concept
Mm-hmm.
of like you turn a certain age and you just kind of flee the nest, like that
Uh-huh.
is not necessarily what's encouraged in the Philippines.
Not neither in
It's more
Brazil.
rooted.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I
So,
get you. Yeah.
so when I was approaching this film, I also really wanted to embrace that idea and think about how the three characters almost felt like a shared life, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much that there's overlap in their stories because they're also experiencing similar things in different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was a matter of finding three different people in three different stages in life, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think with Lauren's story, we meet her right when she's about to graduate from college. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, what was not lost on me was this idea of here she is graduating from college, being told you're supposed to enter the world and be an adult,
Mm-hmm.
but it's during a time period where everything is completely in question, and we're not sure what's happening, and things are closing down, and it's really the unfolding of the COVID pandemic. So the idea of entering uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think for sure put her in a place that was going to create a lot of self reflection, and be a real growing moment. And then with Monica, I think Monica, who had been out of college for a while and was working as a young professional, I think she was starting to realize her power in terms of civic engagement and what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like if you have disagreements with your family, and how owning your beliefs also means having maybe some disagreements with people you love, and what does that look like, and ultimately growing into that idea, right, that
Mm-hmm.
your sense of self is also so tied to your sense of what you think your values are, right, and what you
Mm-hmm.
believe in and what you're willing to stand up for. And then with Jenna, who's another couple years older than
Mm-hmm.
Monica, so we're kind of going down the line. Jenna is someone who had worked for many years as a nurse and then quit because she wanted to dedicate her life to community organizing. um, and then, of course, when the pandemic hits and there's a real need for nurses
Yeah.
and frontline workers, she starts really questioning her choices. And maybe for her, it's a moment to be reminded about the important work that she's doing. And yes, being a nurse is one way to do it, but also being a community
Mm-hmm.
organizer is another. So for me, it was kind of an interesting way to kind of map it out, where you can almost see maybe where Jenna was many years ago is where Lauren is now, and where Lauren will end up is maybe where Jenna is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's one kind of lifeline, and I think that's also part of just the experience of all three of them having families that hail from the Philippines and them, you know, being here in the United States and kind of living through these unprecedented times, such as, you know, the death of George Floyd, the COVID pandemic, you know, the rise, you know, the continual rise of Asian hate, all of these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how about yours? You know, one of the things that, I mean, obviously, just the opening scene alone
Mm-hmm.
is just pretty overwhelming to
Mm-hmm.
be in that room. And I love how you situate us right away. And you have someone enter the room, and they're already very emotional, just
Mm-hmm.
visibly seeing all the women in the room, and especially them going around and saying who they are and what brings them there. But
Mm-hmm.
I loved it because it was also just setting the intention of your film in terms of the important work that these women are doing, but they're doing it with such love and care for one another,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're forming their community, and it was such a it's like such a pleasure to be behind, you know, behind
Mm-hmm.
those closed doors and kind of get that really honored and privileged kind of view. So I'm wondering, I mean, because clearly in this room,
Mm-hmm.
every woman in that room could have a whole documentary, you know, to
Mm-hmm.
themselves about their own stories. So I'm wondering how you yourself started selecting who you would focus your film around.
Yeah. Well, this film actually started as a short film. I was working as a video journalist at a newsroom here in California, and we had a series called The Aftermath, and it was like short films that would cover an issue. It was like the story after the story. And I really wanted to do a segment on Oscar Grant because that was, you know, I moved from Brazil in 2009, and that was the year that Oscar Grant's case was all over the news. And I remember, you know, just moving here to Oakland, like you know, miles away from where he was killed at Fruitvale Station. And so that story just stayed with me, just impacted me because it was my first realization of, wow, this issue of police violence cross borders and it will affect our communities everywhere, right? It was a huge problem in Brazil. It is a huge problem. And it was my realization, this is a huge problem here as well. So anyway, so that was 2009, and years, you know, fast forward, I was working in that newsroom doing the Aftermath series, and I really wanted to go back to Oscar Grant's case and see how his family is doing after, I think that time had been 8 years since he was shot and killed at Fruitvale BART station. And I learned that his mother, you know, she became this veteran activist, and and I heard that she organized these gathering of mothers every year, and she called it the Oscar Grant Legacy Weekend. So I called her. The first thing I did was to call her and ask, I would love to follow you for a few weeks because it was for a short film. Like you know, it was like a 7 to 9 minute films that we were making for the series. And then she said, of course, you can come. I actually have the Oscar Grant Legacy Weekend happening in a week from now. You can come and cover that. And she also explained over the phone. She said, "You're gonna meet mothers from all across the country. You know, Eric Garner's mom is gonna be here. Sandra Bland's mom is gonna be here. So you're gonna hear about. You're gonna meet mothers who you probably heard about on the news, but you're gonna hear from mothers who you never heard about." And I remember just packing my gear for that shoot. I was like a one woman band. So I was, you know, packing my camera gear, and I was already like preparing to be in this very difficult weekend, emotional weekend, because, you know, you're going to meet all, you know, these women and they will tell their story. So I was really preparing for like that sadness. It was like, it's going to be a emotionally charged shoot. And so I showed up with my cameras, and of course there were those very difficult moments because you are meeting those women and they are introducing themselves, that like by telling their children's stories, and then you're hearing this over and over again. But what I left that weekend just feeling incredibly inspired by what Wanda Johnson, the mother of Oscar Grant, was doing. She was creating that safe space for mothers who came, after her, and she was comforting them. She was also sharing strategies for them to with them so they could navigate the justice system. And so she was basically mentoring them and offering them a blueprint for justice. And that was what I left that shoot with. I was like, there were all those sad moments, but I am incredibly inspired by this movement that she's creating, that she's helping to build, right? And I think this is a much more important story to tell. And obviously, I wanted to make a film that made space for the trauma and the pain and the challenge that families face. But I thought that there was an opportunity here to focus on the solutions that these families and their resilience and their resistance, how they are strategizing and fighting this very big problem with very little resources, but they are making a huge impact, right, in our society. So I thought that was a much bigger story and much more important story to follow. And I was like, I can't believe I'm the only journalist in this room, right? And I felt, privileged to be there. And then I was like, I want to make sure that other people will feel the same way. They will feel inspired by this movement of mothers. And that was the time that I was like, I need to tell, this is a bigger story. This is going to be a feature film. I will still make my short film, that it was my assignment, but I couldn't help, but I kept going back and filming more. And I think this story just grew organically in terms of, following the other mom, Angela Williams, in Alabama. As I started, documenting more and more Wanda Johnson, the mother of Oscar Grant's role as a mentor to other moms, I realized she had been in that movement for years, almost a decade at the time. And she was a mentor, and she was offering support, a platform for other moms. So I kind of met her already, like on the very advanced stage of her activism. So when I came across Angela Williams and her story in Alabama, and the fact that Wanda was mentoring her and helping her navigate the justice system, I just felt like there was this element of capturing the story of a mom who was being just welcomed by this movement and was just learning from the other veteran moms. And I felt like, while they were in the similar journey of seeking justice for their children, they were in different stages. It's just like you said, your protagonists were in different stages of their, political participation in society and their mission, to maybe become an activist. We don't know, right? But so I just felt there was these two different sides, one mom who is a veteran, one mom which is just beginning on this movement. And then there was the fact that, one mother had her son killed by police. And I know, and as a journalist, I know that many times the media will only cover this case when it's tragic, right? How many stories of survivors do we pay attention to? Do we even tell? And I felt like by covering Angela's story for the documentary, Angela Williams' story, her son survived a brutal attack by police. But as she said in the interview, he was emotionally killed, right? They didn't kill him physically, but emotionally. So I thought there was that element of like, her son survived, and we need to know what happens, there is so much that happened to her son after. So I felt like I really, it came organically. I met her organically, Wanda started mentoring her. And then I was like, I can't ignore that part. And then I felt like their stories complemented one another. So I think that's how it came about, following both of them. for
I
the
mean,
film.
one of the scenes that I loved too was just seeing Angela and Wanda on the phone together, right? And Wanda is like, this is going to be hard, but this is
Yeah.
what you need to do, and remember what you're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
speak from your heart, and
Yeah.
just remember why you're doing this. And I loved seeing that kind of
Mm-hmm.
mentorship, but also just that sense of community there, right? And how
Yes.
that kind of is inspiring Angela to, do her thing too. So
Yes. Yes.
one of the things you also said that I'm kind of curious about is, for me, other films that I have made, they have all taken various, amounts of time. But you said this one was 7 years, right?
7 years.
So
Yeah.
I'm 7 years. So I just want to know, like, what sustains you, to do that for 7 years. Like, how do you remain focused, not be distracted, and how do you keep going? And which is interesting, right? Because I think this is one of the things that comes up in the film is they're talking about, like, how do you not give up hope? How do you keep going even though you know that there's so many struggles ahead, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious too, from a filmmaking perspective,
Yeah.
um, especially coming from a journalist background where that things can be done very quickly and then put out there in a short, but like obviously
Yeah.
taking the time to craft this much longer piece. What sustained you?
Yeah, I think it's being naive in the beginning, not knowing what would take. I think that helped because sometimes when you don't know, right? You don't know. It's just like,
Yeah.
okay, yes, I would do. I remember just going to, film festivals, and I always, like, before, this is my first feature film, and before starting to work on this, I remember my favorite things to do were just going to festivals and listening to filmmaker talks. And I remember, like, I would hear, like, oh, it took me 7 years, 9 years, 10 years, and I would think, oh my god, I would never I would never stay all this time. But I didn't know it would be so hard to fundraise, like to produce a film
Yeah.
independently. You asked me, like, what sustained me. And I think it's the fact that this story would never leave me. And I feel like, and I would love to hear from you too, because it can be so discouraging, like, applying for grants, and it's so competitive. There's not a lot of grants out there, and there's so many good stories that deserve to be funded, right? And I remember, like, just filming, and then, like, sometimes you get rejections from grants, from funding, and it feels like you feel like quitting, but I think when the story is in your heart and you can never let it go, and I think it will sustain you. Obviously I had to do, like, side jobs throughout the whole process. It was not like I was just working on this. I mean, towards the end, like when I started getting more funding, and it started getting busier, then for probably the last few years I was working just on the documentary because I had gotten some funding, and then I got, like, busier. But I think just, like, believing on this story and knowing that is so important. And again, like as I said before, the topic of police violence ebbs and flows. And like, there were years that were incredibly hard to even fundraise, because people had already moved on to the next topic. This is not a for the industry, this is not an important story anymore, until George Floyd happened, and then all of a sudden, the topic gained new relevance. So I think it's just like persistency. There were stories that I've tried to pursue stories in the past that you get to a point you're like, it's not a thing, right? But this one, I knew that needed to be told, and I think that kind of, like, sustained me throughout the process. So I was wondering, like, how about you? Like, how long did it take for you? Like, did you know, like, this is not your first feature film. Definitely, I've seen your other work before, so you probably were not as naive as me. Like, oh, it's gonna be super quick, right? But still, like, I think you probably approached production in a much smarter way that I did, like knowing what it would take for this film to be done.
Well, for me, it was interesting because in this one, first of all, I think documentary filmmakers, period, but specifically documentary and nonfiction filmmakers are some of the kind of most resilient and strategic people that I know, because it is so challenging to make work, especially in an industry that doesn't always share the same values or
Mhm.
celebrate the kind of work that we're doing, or even prioritize any of the kind of
Mhm.
stories that we're trying to tell, even though
Mhm.
clearly we know people need to learn these stories and see these people on screen. And so I think because of that, I too also have a certain drive there, knowing that, well, I may be rejected from a grant, or
Mhm.
so and so might not be able to support this, or someone might even tell me that they think it's not important, but I know it's important, right? And if
Mhm.
I know it's important, I know someone else feels like it's important, and
Mhm.
I also feel this is overlooked. So I know someone else out there feels like it's overlooked.
Mhm.
Um, and it's up to us, right, to tell these stories then, because we know that there's a real lack of importance for other people, these stories, and we know how important that they are. So yeah, so for me, I think that always kind of drives me. And I do think with other films that I have made, they have been much more conventional is not the right word, but for maybe lack of another better description, maybe a little bit more conventional in the form, in the
Mhm.
way that they were made, knowing that I had to raise a certain amount of money, and knowing, it was going to take
Mhm.
a certain amount of time. But with this one, I just also wanted to try to just be fast and kind of,
Mhm.
maybe draw a little bit of inspiration from journalists themselves, right,
Mhm.
who really capture things very quickly and kind of go in. And because this one specifically, I wasn't working with a camera person, for instance, I was asking for
Mhm.
self documentation, and it was something that was unfolding, but I could have these communication daily with these,
Mhm.
protagonists. I was trying to move on it as fast as possible. So
How long?
for me, I think by
How long was it from beginning to end for you? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah,
cut you. I was just
no, not
curious.
at all. I was just about to think about that. I mean, we started filming in the middle of 2020, right before, like, March of 2020 is when we
Mhm.
started filming, right? And so by the time we premiered it, it was in, I guess that was in 2003. Yeah. So
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
was, yeah. So we filmed for about a year and a half, and then took another half year or so to edit and kind of get it out there.
Mhm.
And then we actually, screened it. And then shortly thereafter is when, and we could talk about this next, it
Mhm.
appeared on Netflix, right?
Mhm.
Thanks to ARRAY and the amazing
Mhm.
work of everyone there at ARRAY. But
Mhm.
yeah, for me, it was really important, as I'm sure it is for you, to get this film to as many, audiences as possible. And so part of me was like, oh, I can't wait for it to get onto Netflix
Mhm.
and
Yes.
be able to be widely available. What a great way for, this film to be released and be seen.
Yeah.
So but one thing that I kind of joke about sometimes with my friend is, thinking about like 4 years, 7 years, whatever. I sometimes say, like, oh, every film is like getting a degree. It's like you're kind of in it for a certain amount of time, and you
Yeah.
see the end result, and you're going to get there. And
Yeah.
it is true, you learn a lot, right, in the process of
You,
making something.
you do. And I think for me, I like to approach, because I don't have formal education in film. I mean, I went to journalism grad school, and they have a very good documentary program, which I didn't take. So I actually did broadcast journalism, but there is some overlapping, in some classes but I didn't learn like the foundation of documentary filmmaking. But then, after I graduated, then I just found myself like just working and being more attracted to working on documentaries, right? I started as an associate producer for a Frontline documentary, and just being exposed to documentary filmmakers and the power of documentary filmmaking, and that just, it was like my first hand experience. But like not until I made For Our Children, which is my first feature film, I approach it as getting a degree in documentary filmmaking, because I learned so much from my mistakes. There are things that I will just bring with me, so things to not do, in the next time. But mistakes that you have to make in order to advance in the industry. So I'm very grateful for all the experience that I collected while working on this.
But yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been amazing, and what an honor. Your film is so beautiful, and I'm just honored to be in conversation with someone who made such a beautiful film. So thank you.
Likewise, thank you so much. I feel like I knew about you, I heard about you, I saw your films, but I was like, this I'm seeing this as a very great opportunity to be in conversation with you and getting to know about you and your art. And I really appreciate all the questions that you asked.
Oh, thanks. And we should thank everyone for listening, and
Yeah.
everyone can check out both of our films on Netflix, thanks to ARRAY.
Yeah.
And mine is Who We Become, and it is on Netflix.
Yeah, so you can stream For Our Children on Netflix, and you can also find us on Instagram at For Our Children Film.